Fair. Thank you for joining us. We are the final show that's recording live today at Bird Fair 2025. So this is the Bird Brain podcast. Today, my guest is Penny Green. Thank you so much for joining us, Penny. Can you please tell the people here, if they don't already know you, and the listeners at home, a little bit about yourself?
Oh, hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me on. So excited to be here. So I've been working in conservation for about 20 or so years now, maybe even, 25 years. I'm feeling old now. And particularly in rewilding at the Knepp Rewilding Project. And now I work at the Whiston Estate. So I'm an ecologist there on that estate, looking for nature recovery opportunities. But also at the same time, I've been running the Knepp Wildland podcast. So I love being a podcaster, so very keen to be on other people's podcasts. And I'm just launching my new Wandering Ecologist podcast as well. So really fun to be a guest on a podcast rather than asking the questions today.
So I'm really excited that you're launching a second podcast, because obviously running one of my own, I know that you learn loads and kind of come into your own and realize the stories you kind of want to focus on more. What exactly is the Wandering Ecologist bringing to the table for you now?
So it's obviously I've loved doing the Knepp Wildland podcast, but it's all about Knepp, and I've done going on for about 40 episodes. But the Wandering Ecologist is now looking outside the hedges, beyond the hedges of Knepp, and looking at positive conservation stories, adventures with friends that are doing fantastic work in conservation, and really celebrating that positive conservation news, because I think there's a lot of doom and gloom in our news at the moment about the environment, but actually we have to hold on to the little wins and the big wins and talk about them more and get them sort of to the top of our feeds, as it were.
I've just been to the Simon Barnes talk about how spring is the favourite season, and he actually ended the talk with that message of you must cling to hope. It doesn't mean being ignorant, but you must cling to hope. And I think that is absolutely rooted in seeing success stories. And the thing is, that's not about being ignorant. It's about, if you don't hear a success story, how can you emulate it? How can you know that things are not all lost if you are not being told the other side of that? So I'm very excited to listen. Without any further ado, I'm going to ask you the major first question of the show, which is, can you please introduce this episode's character and the species, please?
So I had to think about this one, and again I'm going to show my age a bit, because I've chosen Professor Yaffle from Bagpuss, which actually was first aired in 1974. Can I just say I wasn't born in 1974, I was born a bit later on in the 70s, but they were still airing it in the 80s, and I didn't realise until I've just looked at it again that there's only about 13 or so episodes. So I must have just been watching Bagpuss on repeat. But I think, because we were talking about, nature, and that's like a big part of our lives. For me, I think rewatching Bagpuss, I realised there's so much nature in Bagpuss. And Professor Yaffle is just this wonderful wooden bookend that comes alive in this lovely shop that's run by a little girl called Emily. And it's all lost things that she's found and put in the shop, not to sell them, but if someone's walking past and notices their lost thing, they can come and pick it up. And there's a little group of mice that help polish and mend the things that have been found to make them look lovely again, to put them back in the shop window. But there's lovely characters in there. So you've got the Professor Yaffle, the bookend, and there's Gabriel, who's a little toad, kind of a cuddly toad with a banjo, who sings the folk songs. And then you've got Madeline, who's the doll sitting on a seat, sort of telling all the little mice what to do. And of course, Bagpuss is the main character, who's just this beautiful big cloth cat who's pink and white striped. I think he was supposed to be ginger and white, but something went wrong at the dyeing shop apparently. And so it's very iconic. And for me, it's really nostalgic. And just rewatching some of those episodes again before coming on today, hearing the music, just, oh my goodness, it was like a huge kind of blast from the past. And it was actually quite an emotional thing. I absolutely loved it. So I say thank you for having me on, just for bringing Bagpuss back into my life again. It's so lovely.
You're welcome. And I really like it that you stole my fact there. We've obviously done the same research about the colour of Bagpuss. I think it was really lovely that they also didn't waste the material. That really struck me, that they'd had a vision of this sort of marmalade and white cat, and then it was bright pink, which would have been quite strange at the time, because Bagpuss, as you've said, does actually look quite contrasting to the other characters in it that kind of more traditional colours. And even, you know, Professor Yaffle himself is that wooden bookend, like all these nods to nature, and then Bagpuss looks very ostentatiously pink and white. But I love it that they just sort of went, we're just going to go with it. Why not? Why would we waste this? I think that is really great, probably the sign of very confident showrunners. Have we touched on what species Professor Yaffle is?
Oh no, so yeah, that's a very good point. So obviously for me, I was like, yaffling is, and it's a folk name for the green woodpecker, so it's a lovely bookend of like these little round spectacles, and it's a very true representation of a green woodpecker, except for the glasses, and a really lovely character in it. And he's quite, he seems quite sort of stern, and he tells everyone off, and he's quite wise. And I thought actually he's taken the place of what you would normally go for an owl for the character.
Yes.
But it's really interesting to see them sort of having a green woodpecker as that character. He's kind of like a little bit like, you know, telling everyone off, just stop being so stupid, mice, stop mucking about, you know, get on with what you're supposed to be doing. And he's quite a serious character. But I don't know if, because obviously yaffling is the folk name for the green woodpecker. It's like a laughing sound that the green woodpecker makes, normally when it's taking off, normally maybe when it's surprised or when it's calling. So to like, you kind of would associate that with laughing and like a happy character. So it's interesting that they went for a serious character that was the green woodpecker.
Yeah, I think that you see this a lot, and Charles Dickens used to do this in his stories as well. I think their names are often subversive. They're a nod to the sort of oddness of something's presented a certain way but actually comes out another one. I quite like that, but I'm quite nerdy. So Professor Yaffle, you've obviously mentioned he is wise. He is also sometimes grumpy. That struck me as being quite comparable to a couple of other big bird characters that are coming a bit later than the 70s. We've got Iago in Aladdin. We've also got Zazu in The Lion King, both of whom are those kind of assertive, grumpy, but knowledgeable characters. Do you think it's important that we are presented with serious and intellectual creature characters from the natural world? Or do you think actually if we always made them a bit more cuddly and sympathetic, that might be more effective at endearing that species to children?
This is such an interesting question. And I think obviously there is a place for the cute animals with the big eyes that are appealing to young people and they get them excited about wildlife. But I feel like you could come up with a character, create a character of your choosing, and I think there would be a bird that would suit every one of those kind of character or personality traits. And I think it's really important to be obviously taking nature conservation seriously, so you have got the serious characters, but at the same time making it accessible for people and actually sort of seeing maybe traits that, you know, are human traits in those animals as well. I don't think it's a bad thing. So I think there's something, diversity, you know, something for everyone in there. And I think it's really important that all these different birds are kind of represented in a way that actually just gets them into people's lives, however it works.
Yeah, because sometimes memorable is better than cute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So we've already talked about the Wandering Ecologist and the themes of it. My question to you is, if Professor Yaffle was a guest on your show, what do you imagine he'd end up lecturing you about? Would he understand the brief of your podcast, or would he go off on a tangent and be having an axe to grind?
That's a good one. Obviously, Wandering Ecologist is about positive conservation, but he seems a bit kind of like, you know, stern about things. So I think he'd probably be telling people off for kind of maybe habitat destruction. And he'd be looking at, you know, ancient trees where he'd be making the nest with his mate. So he'd be going for nice soft trees because they've got quite weak beaks. So they make quite a round hole as well. So and then sometimes overhanging branches. So it'd be looking for those lovely old trees in our landscape and saying, you know, we need to really protect these trees. So I feel like we'd be talking about them and maybe about the habitat creation that he as a species is creating for other species. So opening up that woodpecker hole will give opportunities to bats, to different kinds of fungi that might grow within trees as well, and all sorts of deadwood inverts, so deadwood insects, so kind of saproxylic invertebrates. So I think he'd be like talking about habitat habitat creation, being an ecosystem engineer, protection of old trees. And also, I think he might talk about ancient meadows and the importance of unimproved meadows and grasslands in our landscape, because that will be where he's feeding on ants. So the protection of this sort of dwindling habitat that's seeing a death by 1,000 cuts as they're being turned into pony paddocks and that kind of thing. I think he'd be like really hot on that as well.
So if Bagpuss was released in 1974 and we are now in 2025, has there been a significant change to meadows in that time, or are we looking at the sort of same human interactions with meadows in the 70s as we're looking at now?
That's a good one. I feel like there's probably been a resurgence recently in protecting meadows, but also we have got cohort of people that are turning some of those lovely meadows into, as I said, pony paddocks, or not managing them in the right way because maybe they don't understand how to manage them. And we've seen it around where we live, sadly. So some of our neighbours have hay meadows that used to be really species rich, and just because they're managing it on the right in the wrong way, or not taking advice, we're seeing that some of those wonderful flowers that are associated with those meadows and all the other invertebrates that are associated with those flowers are disappearing. So it's a funny thing. I don't know whether it's a more contemporary phenomena that we're losing them, but I know sort of like from a long time ago we've been losing. So I think we've lost something like 95% of our meadows.
Yeah.
So it's that, I hope that people's awareness is better now and that more of them are being put into positive conservation management than before, and we can only hope.
If you could only impart one piece of advice for somebody who was in charge of a meadow and they didn't understand the concept of an unimproved meadow, what would be the one big takeaway that you'd be like, oh, come on, this one I can land?
What it would be is like, obviously we have to cut meadows. It's a bit sad at the end of the season when we have to cut meadows, but the most important thing is to collect up your arisings. So once you've cut it, don't leave it on the ground, because all the nutrients will go back into the ground again. So it's all about getting the arisings off, so that you're leaving it sort of the soil fairly sort of impoverished. That's where wildflowers will really thrive. And if you can't do that, get some animals in some livestock in that can manage it, and then get them off quickly afterwards.
Oh, so this is perfect. This is why we need a show like the Wandering Ecologist, because that is so easy to understand and so easy to action and doesn't seem to come at a great cost. So thank you.
And there's people out there that can help you with this advice as well. So if you're listening and have a meadow that you need managing, reach out to your local wildlife trust or something like that. They'll come and help you.
And I guess that's another thing. I think people often think that charitable foundations are focused on their own aims, and they forget that they have a huge outreach branch that would offer advice. So that's a lovely shout out. Back to our lovely green woodpecker friends. I found out that green woodpeckers are one of the few birds that feed mostly on the ground. So what is the ecological role of that?
So green woodpeckers are feeding mostly on ants, and you kind of wonder how on earth someone can make a living out of just eating ants, but they do manage it. They do eat little insects on trees as well, but they're majoring on little meadow ants and those kind of species that are in ant hills. So they are filling a niche, really, where there's not many other species that are feeding in that way. We would have had lots of wrynecks around in the past that would have been feeding in the same way, but they're not really a particularly abundant bird anymore. In fact, they're only probably just coming back as a breeding species in the UK. So they're filling that niche. They're just going for it. Sometimes you see little probe holes in the ant hills where their beaks have gone in, and they've got a really long tongue that wraps around its skull and around its eye socket, apparently into one of its nostrils, because it's something like 10 centimetres long, the tongue of a green woodpecker. And it's got sticky saliva on it, so it kind of puts its tongue down the holes and slurps up all the ants, which is just amazing to think of.
I'm really glad you've brought this up, because this is the one thing from my research that I was like, I'm definitely going to bring this up. Even if Penny doesn't bring it up, I'm going to talk about it. Apparently, one of the great misunderstood things about woodpeckers is that people have assumed that because of what they do, they must have some sort of built-in shock absorbers in their skull, right? Because otherwise, how are they not being concussed? So I kid you not, there's been loads of research into this, because obviously you see this with American football or full contact sports where people have started to become concerned with concussion. So there was a lot of money and time put into studying woodpeckers through the lens of what can we learn to prevent concussion. And shockingly, they do not have built-in shock absorbers in their brain. That was the first thing they found out.
Wow.
But there was a 2022 study from the University of Antwerp, and they basically were filming these 3 distinct woodpecker species pecking at high speed, and they started modeling the impacts of this. The team discovered that the woodpecker heads basically behave like a hammer, which doesn't surprise you if you think about the sound that they make. But their skull is not working like a helmet. It is literally that forceful. The skull itself does not compress at all to absorb shock. So when they looked into this further, they were like, how can this be? Because a peck from a woodpecker generates forces above the human concussion threshold. So the woodpecker somehow manages to escape brain injury. Now, there's a couple of things there that are obvious. It's because of its tiny size, firstly, which lowers the damaging forces. But apparently there's 2 other things that come into play. So you mentioned their super long tongue. You can help me with the pronunciation of this if I get it wrong. Apparently they have a uniquely long hyoid apparatus, which is the tongue, I think.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that word. So I've learned something new today.
That's what I found out in this research paper. And like you said, it wraps around the back of the skull. And I love, in this paper, they said it wraps around the back of the skull and it basically acts like a seat belt for brain stability.
Wow.
So the woodpecker's tongue is a seat belt for its brain. And then they eat with it. That's kind of weird. You can tickle your own brain with your tongue. Okay? The skull is dense, but it's got these spongy bone layers in the forehead and at the back. And apparently that helps channel force away from the sensitive brain areas. So it isn't absorbing it, but it channels where they experience it. And the best thing about this is humans learning from nature, which is always my favorite thing. These insights basically inspired some real world tech. So there was an RCA graduate called Aniruddha Sarabi, and she basically worked out that by looking at that flexible cartilage layer between the woodpecker's beak and the skull, she came up with this cranium bike helmet, which is a liner made from honeycomb cardboard, which offers 3 times more impact absorption than standard polystyrene. It's also lighter, it's more eco-friendly, but she could only trust that that would be the case because the woodpecker gave her that understanding that we could do it that way. So I thought that was super cool.
Amazing. And imagine if it was actually made of honeycomb, so you could eat it on your journey if you got peckish.
That would be even better. So I've got some more questions for you. I'm thinking that we have just talked about their hammering nature, and people often associate woodpeckers with trees and drumming, but green woodpeckers are a little bit different. How is it that they are sometimes misunderstood?
So I think we associate drumming with woodpeckers, which obviously they do. Green woodpeckers do drum, but they don't drum as much. And they've got a really soft beak, so they're only drumming on softwood. So they've got a slightly different call. Different drum. But obviously we've got them calling as well, so doing their yaffle, which kind of alerts us to their presence all the time, doesn't it? So I think they're like the most amazing woodpecker. And it's one of those woodpeckers as well that I feel like you see them a lot, but don't really pay that much attention to. You kind of see great spots, a bit more. Lesser spots are really exciting if you see one because they're so rare. Green woodpeckers are, they're all around us. I mean, they're in parks, in gardens, they're in woodlands, they're all around us. So I feel like, they're probably just not quite the underdog, but we could be paying more attention to them, I reckon.
What would you like people to notice about green woodpeckers?
I think it's the fact that they look so tropical. Like, we've got this amazing yellow, green and red bird. They're quite big. They look really tropical and they sound really unusual. They sound a bit, kind of when you hear golden orioles and species like that, they sound quite exotic. So we should love them more. I'm going to put this out we should all love green woodpeckers more.
Yeah, I love that. You have, am I right in saying you've ringed some green woodpeckers?
Yes, so I'm a bird ringer. I've got a C permit, so do a bit of bird ringing here and there, and been very lucky to have ringed some green woodpeckers in the past when I was working at Knepp rewilding project. And they are the coolest thing in the hand. I mean, they're quite a big bird in the hand, but they've got really short sort of legs and really gnarly feet. Obviously, they have really strong feet for when they're holding on to the tree trunk, so to be careful where you put your fingers near them, and because they're sort of hammering at the wood, well, all kind of woodpeckers are obviously, they must have really strong feet to be able to hold them on the tree whilst they're doing that, as well as the tail, which is quite a sort of it's quite a sturdy structure, the tail, so it helps prop them up against the tree as well. So it's like really noticeable when you see them like that, but also just their face, they're so beautiful, especially the males. They've got a red moustachial stripe, and piercing light blue eyes. They're just really stunning birds.
I don't think I realised they had that colour eye.
Really pretty.
Mm.
And another thing with woodpeckers in the hand is obviously you have to handle all birds with caution and very much look after them. But with woodpeckers, they've got a slightly pointy kind of weapon that they'll point at your hands if you're not careful. And I've actually had it once before with a great spotted woodpecker, where it went like a sewing machine along one of my fingers and left like lots of little tiny dots of blood as it went.
Ew.
So I had like this really cool scar for a while. I was like, look what a woodpecker
Woodpecker scar. I mean, that is a good claim to fame. I think I'd quite like that one. It's
Yeah.
better than just being clumsy.
Absolutely.
I just fell over my own feet.
Yeah. I was attacked by a woodpecker. It's even better.
I was thinking about this because Professor Yaffle kind of holds the group together and also offers some directives, but does get involved sometimes. Do you think that woodpeckers have a collaborative spirit? Are they the kind of birds that other birds are avoiding, or can they sort of be matey?
I don't know. I guess they could potentially be. I don't think they're sort of like semi-colonial, colonial or anything like that, but they potentially are providing a habitat for other birds in the holes that they are making to nest in. And also the male and the female, they pair for as long as they're alive, if you see what I mean. So they are sort of loyal to one another, and even in the winter they'll roost quite close to each other. They won't like really associate with each other much, but they'll hang around in the general vicinity of one another. So they do that, make that sort of partnership, which is a lovely thing as well. And then they can have quite a few young, which I imagine will probably knock around with them for quite some time after leaving the nest. So they have the family groups, but I think sort of overall they're quite a lone ranger. They're kind of like hanging out by themselves, doing their own thing.
And my last question for you, now that you've revisited Bagpuss and looked at this exquisite sort of bookend wooden carving of Professor Yaffle, do you think that the green woodpecker was a good choice, or would have you picked a different bird to play that role?
That's a good question. I think it would have been an easy option to go for an owl in that situation, but I'm pleased they picked a green woodpecker. It's such a lovely character and a bit unexpected, I suppose, in a way, which makes it even lovelier. So, yeah, I think they made the right choice there.
I realised I said it was the last question and we really do need to wrap up. But when I had notes backwards and forwards with you, you had a little story about a certain piece of ceramic.
Oh, yeah, so this is fun. I don't know if you remember it. It must have been about 10 years ago or so. And
I can tell you now, I did not remember, but your email literally made me laugh out loud.
Good, isn't it?
And
so
I was
good.
like, I need to get her to tell the story. And then I've forgotten. I'm sorry, Oscar. Oscar's like, we are waiting for you to finish. But I'm like, I've got questions for Penny.
This is a really good one. So it wasn't me personally, but about 10 or 11 years ago, in a London country park, a guy was walking through with his camera and saw something out the corner of his eye and thought, what on earth is that? And looked at it through his camera and took a photo. And you wouldn't believe it was a green woodpecker with a weasel on its back.
No, I wouldn't believe it. You sent me the picture and I was like,
Did this actually happen?
Has she checked this? Is this AI? I did not think that about you. How rude that I'm saying this to my guest. I was like, what is this? What is this?
Just
This
making
can't be a
stuff
thing.
up.
Yeah, Penny's just sending me some rubbish. No, I was like, what am I seeing? My brain hurts.
And so the fun thing is that he got a photo of it. And what must have happened is that weasels are pretty feisty. I mean, they're the size of a sausage, but they're a pretty feisty predator. They'll take down loads of, whatever they can get their hands on. And this one must have jumped on the green woodpecker to be like, yeah, this is going to feed the whole family for a week. And then the green woodpecker's gone, I'm not hanging around for this, and flown off, but with the weasel still attached, a bit like a little rucksack.
Yeah.
I mean, how amazing. And the coolest thing is my mate is a ceramicist, so she's the coolest person ever. Helen, who's Nosy Mungo on Instagram.
Oh,
and
perfect.
she made a replica of the green woodpecker with a weasel on its back, and the weasel had a cowboy hat on, which seemed like the perfect thing.
It is. I looked at both of these images and was like, you're my kind of guest. I like your sense of humour. This is excellent. And did you have another Bagpuss claim to fame?
Oh, yeah. The other cool thing is, a really good friend of mine, Henry Brocklebank, who I used to work with at the Sussex Wildlife Trust, one of her childhood friends, who she's still friend with, is Emily, who's the little girl who owns Bagpuss. And I've met Emily. How cool is that? It's a claim to fame and a half, isn't it?
It's really cool. Did she tell you she enjoyed her experience as Emily?
No, I didn't ask. I was too starstruck, I think.
We just decided that it's better if we assume that she did.
Yeah, I imagine it was a lovely childhood.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I'm really excited about the work you're doing on the Wandering Ecologist. I think it's perfect timing for a podcast that covers those themes. And I hope you've had a lovely bird fair. And thank you so much.
It. Thank you so much, Kelly. I've loved it. Thank you for having me on as a guest.
Thank you.
Elliot explains. Today was quite a tricky one. Bagpuss is very old. Very, very old. Over 50 years now, I think. So I've had to do some good research on Professor Yaffle. So I'm just... Here's what I'm saying to you. He speaks in such a posh voice, like you would not believe. He is so snooty. He wears glasses right on the tip of his nose. And he, what does he do? He waffles on about stuff. And he's only a little wooden woodpecker. And he doesn't even peck wood. This is my thoughts on Professor Yaffle from Bagpuss. Elliot explains.